So the meeting is actually being recorded, and again, as a reminder, we've put the link in the chat window for the meeting materials for today's call, and this is also the one-stop shop where you can get other information related to the meeting slides and so forth. And so with that, Hera, you're the one driving, so I'm going to turn it over to our co-chair, Dr. Bill Gregg. Dr. David Comita sent his apologies. He had a conflicting call today, so I'll turn it over to you, Bill.
Great. Thank you, Dee Dee. So welcome back, everybody. I trust that everyone had a hopefully a relaxing Thanksgiving, what we're going to do is kind of jump back into where we left off. And we'll start with going back through some of our introductory slides. And really, we try to do that just because there's probably a lot of people who are going to jump in and out of this group. And as people come in, we want to make sure that they're kind of grounded in the logistics of how things work. And then we're going to talk in a little bit more detail about kind of that assignment we talked about last time, and make some modifications to how we're thinking about it in terms of the time frame, and just kind of get everybody's feedback on that. And then I'll hand it over to Joe to go back through some of the 2020 priority work items and even some more details that I won't get to on the proposed work items. So if that sounds reasonable, go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so just as a reminder, where we are for the current work group members, we represent 187 organizations and 264 participants. Obviously, no, we're not getting everyone on each of the calls, but that's a great representation. And of course, as you look, everything from providers to developers, all the way through HIEs, consumer patients, representatives, and public health. And so we really appreciate the depth and breadth of all the participants in this process. Go ahead to the next slide. And this is kind of that reminder again about how, we, just because of the workload involved, we're not sending out emails for each of these things. But there's a link at that website for the data usability work group. And if you lose the link, just go right to the Sequoia page, and you can look under the work groups, and you can see data usability is under the interoperability matters. Find it there. But every meeting is going to have the minutes, it's going to have the slides and all the links that you need, as well as people can sign up. So if you encourage others to join, who might be a good contributor to this work group, we really want to continue to encourage that. This is a long slog, and so we know that there will be some changes over time, but we want to kind of continue to encourage that involvement. And we greatly appreciate those of you that are devoting time, particularly acknowledging the challenges everyone is facing, particularly the provider organizations and other groups in dealing with COVID-19. I mean, we know that those are posing challenges that keep coming back, and so know that all of us are thinking of all of you who are on the front lines. So go ahead to the next slide. So just one more time, covering really greatly appreciate the Sequoia project and the members who sponsor the Sequoia project for sponsoring this effort, and really acknowledging the importance of data usability to the future of data sharing and interoperability. And so, we've got quite a few members. There's some new ones that are listed at the bottom. This is going to continue to grow, we hope, and hopefully this will continue to spur that innovation and an involvement from these different groups. All right. Okay, so this brings us to what we were talking about with the priority work items and kind of the meeting logistics. We had talked last time about kind of a homework assignment. I think in retrospect, especially over Thanksgiving and with everything that's going on, there were a few contributions on the Google document, but just a couple. There wasn't a lot of contribution, and so what we've decided as a group is, our whole goal for this first phase is really to end up with a culled priority list. That's going to be this spring. So what we want to do is to really extend this kind of viewing this as the brainstorming part, where everybody can just throw ideas out there. And I really want to encourage everyone, and I'm actually going to step through doing this. I'm going to try to do a live demo just to, and I actually made a change to the page just to kind of denote the new items, just to encourage people just to put ideas down. I wouldn't worry about it. Everybody's going to have different levels of experience with standards development. That's, or you know, how these things have happened in other work groups. But I would encourage everybody who just has an idea. It could be a pain point from your organization, just to bring something forward. Don't worry about how well formed it is. That's where we can each give feedback. And the person who more effectively wears the standards hat can say, well, here's something I think that might apply to that. And so how can we do that? So our proposal is to continue this effort through these December meetings and kind of give everybody December to continue to contribute and comment. We want to really encourage that dialogue to start. And also I would say, as in going through this, you know, welcome any of you to speak up now, any comments or concerns about us doing the process in this way. You know, we're hoping that this becomes as democratic as possible. But if there's any thoughts on better ways that we can do it, we would greatly appreciate it. Just as a quick reminder, the work group will go on hiatus for December 24th and December 31st. I imagine that attendance would be very low during those meetings, and give everybody that time off for the holidays, and then resume on January 7th of 2021. Hard to believe that we're moving into 2021. But just kind of going back to those, you know, what I'm going to do is open up, and I'm going to make an attempt here to share my screen. And here I may, okay, there we go, perfect.
I was going to say, I think I just took the presenter from Hera and prompted you. Hopefully it will.
Okay. All right, now I'm going to.
Thank you for being our guinea pig to kind of demonstrate to other folks kind of what we're looking for in the way of the process.
No problem at all. It's actually, apologies here. I didn't have the right permissions to do it, so here we go. Hopefully that will take care of it. Okay, now I'm going to try again. All right. It's telling me that I need to restart GoToMeeting to be able to do it, so bear with me. It should just take a few seconds, but I might disappear.
Yeah, you may drop off, no problem. Yep. So in the meantime, while you're doing that, I'll fill in some of the dead air for you, so you don't have to be put on that spot, Bill. Thank you. So I am getting ready to chat the link. I'm typing it right now. So basically, what Dr. Gregg is going to be doing is going to actually walk you through kind of what we had assigned in the way of a homework assignment previously. And this link that I'm about to chat to you is where we would want you to actually go to. Now, it is a Google document. I understand there are folks that sometimes have access issues with a Google document. Please let us know if you're one of those organizations that cannot access this. But we found that in previous work conducted and coordinated that this methodology works well because everyone can see everybody else's contributions, can add on to them, it's collaborative, and it keeps version control very well for us. So I see you're up now, Bill, so I will
perfect. Thank you for bridging the gap there for me. So I appreciate everybody. So if you can see there, this is for those of you that haven't looked at it, and I know many of you have, some of you have contributed. This is the data usability work group proposed work items, as you can see on my screen. And many of you, I see a bunch of you joining now. So at the very top, we have those descriptions for the link to the page. Those are all the ones that were fed in from the work that Joe had talked about over the past few weeks, really coming from that previous work group and from some of the other sources. Those were kind of feeder things that weren't completed, but could then be things that we would move towards. Over on the right, we kind of had created a general classification. Does this fall, because as a reminder, we're working in those three types of use cases: provider to provider, provider to public health agency, and healthcare entity to consumer. Does it fall in any one or more of those? And then, or does it apply as just kind of a general end user usability or a data quality issue? And so it kind of gives, people can contribute a new idea, a classification of an existing one or a new one, or just make comments on it. And so as you can see that list there, what I did was added that line in yellow just to say, here's the new items and suggestions. So now people can start adding. And all you need to do is everybody's familiar, is just start to type there. And that's where I would encourage, don't worry about if you don't have an attachment to attach to it, you don't have any historical documents, it could just be an idea. And as I mentioned, just thinking about a pain point from your organization. So one that has just recently come up that's been discussed at our organization is around the volume of vital signs, especially from acute care hospitals. And I see someone just entered one in, so that's great. And so as you start to look at things like vital signs, it again doesn't have to be a so if I typed in usability of vital signs, volume considerations. So it's not really duplications, and it might be, but it would be something that we might want to tackle. And I don't have anything to attach, so I don't have a link to attach to it. But I'd welcome others to say, well, maybe here's another standard that already addresses this. Is it complete or is it incomplete? And that way, everybody can start throwing new ideas in. Can I ask everybody who's to mute? Okay, perfect. Thanks.
We had a brand new caller that just joined us. Caller number 10, I just muted you, so thank you. Okay.
So really just doing that. So, I know sometimes we may be reluctant to contribute because we're not sure how something might fit in, but just go ahead and throw those in there exactly as I just did. And if you've got a link to a document, you started a document, go ahead and establish that link. I would say for the use case, I would apply this to use case provider to provider, maybe less so to public health agency, but also to the consumer. We don't want to overwhelm people with data. The usability, if I've got to sift through a large volume, that may be a big challenge. It may not be a challenge on the data side and from a technology perspective, but to the clinician who's receiving that data and sifting through it, it's a big deal. And so that's where we want to wear the different hats that we have. And so that was really what I wanted to suggest. And I wanted to open it up if anyone wanted to make any comments, either in chat or however, just any thoughts on the process that we have in place. Is this good, bad, any adjustments? Any thoughts on using these next few weeks to really, let's just get every idea out there, and then we can start into 2021 honing things down and refining the details. Anything that you would add, Dee?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions that are coming into the chat, so I wanted to try to address them or make sure that I punt them to Joe to help us address. So we got one question saying that they can't access the Google document. So we will powwow internally to figure out if we can do something. It's going to be very difficult for us to download these and post them. We can download like this one, but as you see all those hyperlinks in sections rows 2 through 13, those are hyperlinked to other Google documents. So we start having a nesting issue, which would be very difficult to try to download every single week, every single document to also publicly post. So let us consider what other options we may have, but definitely let us know if you do have issues. If we start seeing a lot of folks having access issues, we definitely need to make sure we address that. Another question we had is, do you need to push the share button after entering something in? You shouldn't have to push any share button. If you are online, you see all those different colored boxes that you're seeing on the screen are people moving around, and it's color coded by all those little animals in the top right hand corner. So you shouldn't have to share anything. You should be able to type it real live time. If you create a document that gets linked in the background, you may need to share that. I hope that answers that question. Another one was privacy and security seem generally applicable to data usability. Information flows at a speed of trust, but isn't explicitly represented. I would definitely recommend, Michael, take and put that in there. Put that information. Look and see if it. I don't see where we are addressing that specifically, so definitely enter it in that new item suggestion as another line item, and we may put you on the point to flesh that out a bit. Joe, I'll let you be the master of that ceremony to flesh that out once Michael puts the privacy and security piece in there. We also had a question. The folder link gives you ability to edit anything within, but you will have to sign into a Google account. Fair enough. You do have to sign in because it tracks versioning and who contributed what. Anonymous, though, should still be able to allow you to access it. I don't know if you have to log in. That's something we'll need to check into. And then, Joe, thank you for providing some links. And another one was, will the link and the ask be included in an email? Trying to remember an action item from a call is not always successful. No, we are, for those that may not know, and just to reemphasize, we are not pushing any data to anyone. We are making everyone go to a site, a website where all of this information will be available. So the homework ask here, the links are in the slides to these documents, so you should be able to have a breadcrumb trail within the slides that are already out there. They're in a PDF. And the last slide that we covered this part on was slide number, the links for all of these documents are on slide number 8, where Joe's going to take over. And I'll let Joe provide additional information there for any other suggestions he wants to add. All right, so back to you, Bill, to finish up, and then turn it over to Joe when you're ready.
No, really, those were great discussions, and really appreciate all the comments and people already entering things in. It's exactly what we want to do. And again, don't worry if there's overlap between things. Fully expect that there will be. We will sort all of that out. Just throw those ideas out there, because it may be that it isn't necessarily a new idea, but it's a new take on the same idea. And so that new take might be a critical aspect of usability. And so we want to make sure we don't miss any of those.
Bill, this is Jonathan. I want to offer up a question.
Yeah, sure.
I appreciate that we're in brainstorming mode, but I feel like I'd like to have a little more defined guardrails on this topic. Obviously, data usability, but can you speak to that a little more exactly? The type of topics that you would not want to see in here, or something along those lines, please.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. And I, where we really kind of drew the line was really just around those use cases. And I'll also let Dee Dee and Joe add where I may be speaking too generally. We didn't want to restrict it too much. If it is something that pertains to sharing data between provider to provider, provider to public health agency, and healthcare entity to consumer, and really impacts how that receiver can use that data, both in terms of practicality, it could, semantic interoperability, all of those issues are on the table. Now, we are fully acknowledging the prior art. There's a lot of things that are there, but what we're saying is we're kind of tackling that last mile, where maybe the current implementation guide, whether it's a FHIR implementation guide, it could be a CCD spec, where that may not be enough. And what happens is people apply it in different ways, and you end up with unusable data. So we really want to tackle that. That's that last mile. How do we take all the things that are there? We're working within the milieu of those existing standards, and how do we refine them and adjust them in those implementation guides to kind of make it really centered on that end user, the person who's going to be receiving that information, and not checking a box that I got it, but I'm actually going to take it and use it to care for a patient or to provide something else operationally. Dee Dee, Joe, would you add anything to that or subtract?
Nothing from me, Joe.
Nope.
Does that, Jonathan, was that helpful? So I wouldn't constrain yourself. Think broadly. When we as a group, we may constrain it based upon practicality, something we want it to be something that's achievable in the next 18 months. So that may restrict some things that just aren't practical to do. But I wouldn't at the outset remove anything. If there's an idea, throw it out there.
Okay, thank you. No, I think that helps.
All right. Does anybody else have any thoughts? All right. So I'm going to hand it over to Joe. I believe, let me stop sharing. Does not seem to want to.
I'll just I just made Joe a
There we go.
presenter. I took it away from you. I
Perfect,
didn't
thank you.
want to mess you up in the middle of it, but
All
so
right.
Joe, you're up. Thank you.
I stole it. It's all good. Thanks. All right. So thanks so much. That was a great walkthrough, and it's good to see people plugging in values for like the mapping these items, these work items to use cases. It's good to get a little bit of collaboration. So what we're going to do is what we'll probably be doing for a while now, which is a cadence of reviewing changes, new work items and changes to existing work items, and seeing if anything has changed in terms of like which use case it impacts, if anything has changed in terms of, if you think about what our ultimate goal is that we're building this backlog that subsequent work groups are going to work these individual items. And so we do something a little bit like this within IHE, where we identify work items. And part of that process is you make the case for each item. In other words, you might characterize its difficulty, its complexity, its how urgent it is to fix. How many, do you have any grasp of how many stakeholders there may be that are interested in this particular thing? Like, is it broad applicability or very, very focused applicability? That sort of thing. And so you can think of it that each of these items in the page, you can start to put this information. You can start to make the case for your favorite item so that when people start to review these things and start to think about the priority that they want these things worked in, because we may not be able to do them all. If you make the best case for your work item, then it stands a better chance of making the cut. Does that make sense? Everybody follow? So what that means is that your homework, which will be the same for the following weeks, is to put the information in each of these pages or in the description that's needed for us to categorize it, for us to understand it, to know where it slots in, and to be able to prioritize it and size it. Okay. So let's jump in. We've got. Let's look at the new items, because I believe we have been. I think we've been through all of the existing items. We may not have. We may not have hit row 13. I don't remember if we have. Does anyone on the call know if we already hit that one? It was a very specific problem that somebody had. Let's check that out real quick. Yeah, so this is a very specific interoperability point, and I'll leave it to you whether or not you think this impacts usability sufficiently enough for us to deal with. So I'll pause for you to read. So the final bullet was my editorial comment that we captured the issue, but it wasn't specific enough for us to understand what the issue really was. So, you know, some of these things are going to be like this. People are going to say, well, I have this pain point, and if they just drop off and they don't give us enough information, well, we can't really answer the mail. This looks like a data consistency issue. And so if anybody feels near and dear to this problem, this is a pain point that you have and you want it addressed, maybe flesh this out a little bit, give an example or something like that, and make the case for it, you know, say, oh, it's real easy to fix, and here's the specs and that sort of thing. Okay. I'm going to close this one up unless anybody wants to talk about it. Let me check the chat real quick.
There was a chat there from Tom. He said none of the links within the CCDA it says CCDA document, but work for me. Are they supposed to?
Are you referring to the guidance document from the joint document work group? Yes. Okay. That's yeah, that's my fault. The working copy of that is a Word document, and all I did was just print it out to PDF, and I didn't realize that those links were not going to be turned into hot links. So what I can do is put that draft copy in Word form in that folder so you can get to it that way. So I'm going to do that right now while we're doing this, so you can follow along if you want. Let me do that. Oops, gonna move some things here. All right, let's look at
it. The first link that I sent, and then Joe sent the link directly to the Google spreadsheet that we're looking at. So
yeah, so here's our folder. It's just got a couple of things in here. So I'm just gonna copy this in here we are. Draft changes accepted docx format. So you'll be able to follow along, and these links should work for you. Although I will say, sometimes depending on your Word application, the way it's configured, sometimes clicking on a link inside a Word document also doesn't work, and you might have to just open up that open up the link manually. You know, so for example,
yeah, some organizations block the ability to open it up if you're using something like Microsoft Office 365, things like that. There's ways to secure an environment. So
exactly. So all right, so let me do one more thing. I'm actually going to open that copy myself so I can follow along in case we get any questions, and I can follow any links.
Let me just real quickly answer. There was a question that a person jumped on late. How do we get access to the Google document? I'll put the link to this Google document real quickly again, but it should be open for anyone who has link to access it. You shouldn't have to need permissions. And I'm putting it out there here just in a moment.
Yep. So let's see. So here's a link, for example. You can see it's a real link, but you'll also see, let's see if this works. Yeah. My Word is not configured to do this. So what you do in that case is you go to the hyperlink and you just copy it out of here, and you can put it in a browser. Okay. Apologize for that. We have to, you know, we're sometimes at the mercy of whatever app you're using to read this. All right. So that is that. Let's move back to the thing here. Okay. So we're done with the we're done with that name formats thing, unless anybody wants to jump in on that. Let's look at the new ones. We have guidance for the translation of lab result codes and nomenclature, which I think we hit a little bit last week. And oh, that's weird. Okay. So I'm trying to follow this. I'm not quite getting the gist of it. Lab results are stripped and translated by some receiving EHRs. I'm assuming what you mean is that an EHR gets a message from a lab information system, maybe in an HL7v2 format, and then before it shares it as a CDA document with other EHRs, it's doing something. It's not just translating, but it's stripping information about that. Is that accurate?
So this is Andrea. One of the points that most all EHRs in the US are doing is they're not using the performing laboratories naming conventions. So if you want to achieve semantic interoperability, and each EHR has their own terminology, each physician practice has their own terminology in their builds, and it's different from the performing laboratory, you're never going to achieve semantic interoperability.
Okay. So
it's part of the process in the US for how a lot of the EHRs are built. And a number of EHRs also allow providers or folks that are supporting clinical informatics in the EHRs to add different link codes than the performing laboratory, who's the expert on how their tests are performed, provides in the messages to the EHR in a number of cases too. So you can have, again, issues, and that can cause issues in clinical decision support, displays, and other things downstream too. So this is just a known problem. So it's not as simple probably as a lot of people think.
Right. So my question for you though is, let's acknowledge that's a real problem. Let's acknowledge that that's a real problem. My question is then, is that this problem, or is that a different one? Is it the one that I'm displaying right now?
It's part of that problem, yes. So if you have the same, so let's say you have the same LabCorp test, whatever it is, a serum rhubarb level, and you have different EHRs that receive it, and they were all represented differently, and you start exchanging over an HIE, as ONC has been promoting with interoperability. How are providers going to know if they're named differently, that they're exactly the same test?
Right, Joe, this is Jonathan. I am the author of that particular blurb. I did this for two purposes. I did this directed at Andrea's specific issue that she brought up on that, on that meeting, but I did it, after the meeting, and unfortunately my foggy brain did not remember her name or the specifics of the incident. But yes, it's my best capturing of what she just verbally put in.
Okay, that's great. So my request of Andrea, then, since you're like the ultimate expert in this, is I believe you've also, Andrea, have added a bunch of information to this page. And this page, prioritize list of laboratory results. I mean, the name isn't really the best, because this page is basically the placeholder for everything we did with labs with the last iteration of the joint work group. Okay, so everything that ended up being in section 2.5 of that guide was we were hashing it out in this page. Okay, so it's a lot of related issues.
So should we change the name, Joe, to something like prioritize list of laboratory sharing or data sharing, since that's more specific to those results?
Yeah, I mean, this is just the name of the page. It's just a placeholder for a bucket of work items. It really, I would think we would want to manage the items in here separately, because they might not all have the same priority.
Breaking them out, yeah, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, but to Dee Dee's point, when you were showing the original listed grid earlier of your prioritization, and I put a comment in here, yes. Right now, your use case is provider to public health. That's the only box to the right that's checked for that row 4, right? So, if you're focusing only on public health, then we need to clarify what this means, because is it lab reporting to public health? Is it electronic case reporting to public health? Because those are very different requirements by each state legally. So,
Nope, it's different. I'm gonna fill these in, because based on what we talked about on these items, it definitely was provider to provider, because there was discussion of trending of codes, and then it also had to do with data quality. I wouldn't imagine it's so much consumer. It might be end user usability. I don't know if physicians want to say that, but at any rate, yeah, we'll take the action to just rename this bucket something different. Okay, but what I want to
crisp on your scope and goals, and your use cases, I think that would help a lot of people.
Wait, I'm sorry, what was that?
Cut off
I said,
people.
sorry, if you have crisp definitions for your use cases and your scope, I think it would help a lot of people.
Okay. Well, we've got them from the whatever DD's original charter for the group was. I imagine part of what we're going to need to do is to create these use cases. I mean, wouldn't you say that that is part of what drives us towards identifying the work items that come out of those use cases?
Yeah, and the only way you've got it stubbed out right now, Joe, is columns B, C, and D. Those three high-level buckets are what we want to focus on, but the scope can be anything around those. It can be any type of pain points that you have within those, and then the descriptions enough so that other folks can follow it as a topic item. So think of the descriptions as kind of a sub use case. So when you mentioned, okay, to public health, is it electronic case reporting? Is there a pain point you're seeing right now around case reporting, and create one for that? In other words, we want to gather everybody's wish list here
No, this is turkey.
so that we can work through it.
There's just bread here, fresh bread here.
Yes.
This one ends at 1 o'clock, and then I have another half-hour call, and that's it.
I would just have a mute thing.
Michael,
okay.
Hudkins, you may want to go on mute.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's get back to this lab issue. So the question for Andrea is, let's find the best home for the specific issue you were talking about. You could put it in here. It probably would be better, I would say, if let's close this one. Find it. Here we are. So might as well, since we've got its own page, why don't we rework this so that it says what you just said, okay? Because I think that sort of represents a new, well, I don't know if it's a new ask. Let me show you what the original paper says about lab results, specifically the thing, what comes from the lab systems, okay? All right. So the first section, 251, is about the life cycle. This is not about that, okay? This is about interoperable codes, more or less, codes and text. And so we identified a problem where a lab value would be vendor or facility specific codes or free text, and we identified that as a problem. And it seems like in what you're saying, that is a feature. Is that accurate?
What do you mean by feature?
Well, what I mean is, we're saying here's a problem. You're sending lab results that have been put into a CDA into a multiple community ecosystem, right? You're passing it from HIE to EHR to HIE, and they're getting things that they don't recognize because it may be a vendor specific code or free text, okay? And so the way we address that here was we talked about, well, all right, we'll create translations. And we talked about one of the concerns from a vendor on our previous calls was, well, if you translate it to something like a common LOINC code, you may lose specificity. And so there may be benefit that you're losing out on. And so we kept this general guidance that if you keep the original code as a translation, then both needs can be met. So you have both the specific one and you have the harmonized one. Now, if we want to do something different than that, let's identify that as a work item.
Yeah, so you're unraveling a thread of a lot of the lab data interoperability issues that we've been working on for over a decade since meaningful
Right.
use. And I think it deserves its own meeting, not to take away from this general discussion, because I know there's probably a lot of people that are not interested in lab results and reporting.
Right.
However, it overlaps with anything lab related. So what people refer to outside the lab as local codes are the mnemonics and things that are kind of the laboratories used for building and distinguishing the tests on their menu per CLIA legal requirements. So it require an act of Congress to change, okay? So there's a little bit difference in some of these understandings depending on the information systems. If your downstream use in the CDA is your CRISP scope, then a lot of that needs to preserve from the LIS to the EHR for lab accreditation requirements too, because laboratories do interface checks to make sure things are displayed correctly from the message. So there's a lot of different regulatory involved and stuff. I don't want to really go into it because, like I said, we don't have enough time today, but this impacts all of this. And the other thing that's a foundational principle is that you cannot tell the meaning of a lab test by its name alone, which gets into your semantic interoperability goal. So yes, LOINC helps, but it also, you have to have the full amount of information about a test. If it gets lost downstream because of how EHRs are processing things, and then when you try to do the CDA, you're missing information. That's, I think, leading to these problems that providers and others are commenting upon.
Yes. Okay. That all makes perfect sense. I think one of the things that we talked about, I'm trying to see where we mentioned it, was that yeah, it's not a single value. It's not a single value like the link code for the lab, but rather that like when you're looking at the livid mapping, that you've got your manufacturer, model, the analyte name, and
you should ignore that because it's out of scope for your CDA. This is only livid, as we noted and Ricky noted in the previous document, is used for in the laboratory for their mappings. It's not downstream with your use case. So that's where there's some things that are commingled or contradictory, and so that's why trying to get a crisp understanding of this would be helpful, because we could pull some of this out so you don't have to worry about it if it doesn't apply.
Okay. Okay.
Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that would help. I guess what that implies, though, well, maybe not about livid, but is there a role for an EHR to receive a lab message and perform translation, to share it?
What do you mean by translation? Because I mean, you want to achieve and retain that semantic meaning that the laboratory's original source of truth is providing to an EHR, right?
Yes, so adding a translation. Because that is one of the main pain points, okay? If the assertion is that everything's coming from the lab in a form that is suitable for everyone to consume, that's not what the pain points have been coming back with. So, so a solution for that is to add a translation along the way.
I think we need to
the original
check at what point that occurs, because again, with the regulatory requirements, depending on the point of where you're talking, it may or may not apply, because you're changing the meaning of a lab test or you're losing information, which could be a patient safety and a quality issue too, per your other checkbox that you had.
Yeah,
Okay.
I wanted to point out a comment that Tom just made, and I think that might kind of capture what we're saying. What's being said here is that translation is fine for internal use, but don't transmit or propagate that translation. Is that a fair statement, Andrea?
Yeah.
That they might, as long as you're not losing information and you're not creating something new and then propagating that.
Well, and so that's part of the point too, is, because that's what a lot of EHRs are doing, is they're translating and potentially commingling results that shouldn't be commingled, et cetera. So at certain points, right. Because and I've seen some mappings that are just, where they're displaying things that shouldn't be displayed together, because I know they're not doing things like temperature and putting degrees Celsius and degrees Fahrenheit values of 32 together, but there's a lot of things downstream that could be improved, but like I said.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this would probably be best served for another call where we have a great discussion, because we can go into the details.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think we should probably have dedicated calls just to analyze the work items related to lab codes. That'd be my takeaway, because that means I'll admit some of the things you're saying right now, I'm thinking, okay, a lot of my assumptions are completely off base then, because, and that's, you know, that's okay. I don't know if anyone else is in that boat, but the idea that you would not share translations, yeah, go ahead.
Just as a reminder, what we're trying to gather are the pain points. We need to have enough of a short scope document to understand what is the problem. All we're going to do is create a table of contents to address the scope of what we want to get into these 3 different implementation guides. And then starting in April of 2021, we will probably take and break up either into subgroups potentially, or do it as a whole group. We'll have to determine how much work we have on our plate and how much willingness we have, because we need you guys, all of the work group members, to help us understand all these nuances from both sides. Because unless you solve it from both sides, to your point, if an EHR just does X, Y, Z, but it's not helping with semantic interoperability, what are the things we can do as a baby step? It may not be able to do all of them at this first phase, but let's try to at least address what should be considered, and then we'll you know, have some yin and yang with that from April through January of 2022, where we'll hopefully publish what the consensus was based on all those discussions. Does that help as well?
I would say it helps, but I would say that
right now, but we need to discuss enough to understand.
Right. What I'm saying is that this is a question about scope, because the statement that I'm hearing is that a pain point that was identified by the last work group as this causes pain and let's solve it this way. What I'm hearing is that it's not a pain point. Right. It's not a pain point, and it wasn't solved right. And the whole premise that you can solve it by translating values to a harmonized set that is safe for cross-community consumption is not a valid assumption. And that gets, you're right, it takes a lot of work off our plate if we can chuck that. But yeah, okay. All right, yeah, well, it sounds like, though, that the pain point can only be mitigated by improving the data directly from the labs, if that can be done, and it can't be helped by the EHRs once it's received. That's what it sounds like. So for a scope constraint, that's good to know. All right, so yeah, we'll shelve the rest of discussion about labs for now, except to say that I have a request for Andrea to flesh this out. And if this particular issue that I'm displaying right now is one that's duplicated on this larger page, let's pull it out of this larger page and just move it here. Okay? Does that seem fair?
Sure. Do you have the link for the page you're showing?
Yeah, I'll paste it. I mean,
copy it into the chat.
It links from here as well. It links from the spreadsheet. There you go. If you want origami, go for it. I get you. I get what you're saying. So John is putting some very helpful chat stuff, as is Tom, and so as is Andrea. So do we preserve all those chats?
It's preserved in the recording, and then I have the chat as an HTML file, and all of that stuff gets loaded onto Box and shared with you and the co-chairs.
Okay, great. Yeah. Good. All right. So let's look at the data usability characteristics. This new thing. Fantastic. Okay, so I know what this is. All right, so we have seen, so thank you, Gary, for this. I guess this looks like a very large work item. And so I guess the question would be, is this all right, I'm not going to read John's chats, useful although they are, because I'll get lost here. So Gary, is Gary on the call right now?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thanks for being here. So I see a lot of key qualities and like known and verified, known and tied to actions taken that seem to me to be oriented more towards the process of the data gatherers rather than any kind of interoperability issue or anything like that. Is that accurate, or is this just kind of teeing things up for how it interacts with interoperability?
Well, clearly, if you don't capture it, you don't have it from that point forward. So the point of capture is the place where you would expect certain kinds of data to be collected, and then we see data managed over time, including exchange, and ultimately finding its way to an end user. And so again, we've kind of staked ourselves with the premise that data quality or data usability is a perception of the ultimate end user. And so the more context that user has, I mean, it's a basic issue of trust. Where did this data come from? How do I know I can trust it? How do I know it hasn't been superseded by something more recent? How do I know that it is represented in its proper context? How do I know that my purpose of use is not in conflict with the purpose of capture? Some of these kinds of things need to at least be part of the infrastructure we're talking about, so that we have, in fact, that kind of traceability, if you will. Maybe all of that data doesn't accompany the data, the specific elements, but that there is some specific source of truth that can be pointed to and can be accessed if those kinds of issues are of interest or concern. I mean, it really comes down to, do we have the right kind of data available for an end-to-end audit, so that we know that what the author saw and intended to represent in their clinical note or whatever it is actually what the end user sees and has the same understanding based on that content and context. So it's a big issue, no question, but I thought I would put it out here as a draft or a proposal, something that could be considered as we delve further into this work.
So as I'm reading this, it looks like it almost looks like a set of assertions that would apply irrespective of the use case. Is that accurate? Or would you say that some of these matter more for some use cases than others?
Well, they may matter more, but I think that it is a generalized set of issues that need to be considered, I think, within each use case. And some may weigh more directly on particular use cases than others, certainly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
So let's just take. Go ahead.
This is Bill. I just wanted to point out one thing, just kind of looking at in the middle there, where you talk about known to be altered or transformed from source content representation to another. I think that touches on, at least peripherally, the issue that Andrea was bringing up around the things that come from a lab system, and there might be some alteration or modification where you do lose some information or it alters the meaning of that data. Am I thinking about that wrong, or?
No, that's correct. That's exactly the issue we have with transformation or translation of data content.
Yeah.
As information flows from source to use.
Yeah. So this strikes me as something, and I had looked through it briefly before. Is it might be a way to frame some of the themes of how we, for individual use cases, for how we think about some of these things. And so being able to, since this is kind of a comprehensive list of all of those, and to your point, they all probably apply, but there may be some that are more important in certain situations, and where we settle on a use case this might be a good language for us to use, or at least to ground in this this framework.
Yeah. I think what I'm hearing is that, well, here's an example, by the way, of what's captured when you translate a code in a CDA. It's minimal. It shows you the two codes side by side, and that's kind of, like I said, it's a minimal way of representing it. There are other ways of representing alterations, and we actually have an issue for we have an issue identified for use of provenance, and it looks like a lot of these things have to do with particular provenance needs. Let's see, here it is. So like known to be altered, transformed. Well, one of the provenance in the basic provenance paper that was just produced by HL7 and is adopted for US CDI, the meaning of this is they've narrowed it down to like the author organization, and the author timestamp, and just the last hop. So if you have, for example, if a doctor receives two documents that each have the same allergy, and then they reconcile it and create a single allergy that came from those, at least according to basic provenance, just the fact that that physician took ownership as the new author as of a certain date, that is sufficient to meet basic provenance requirements. What would be interesting from this group
Joe,
is whether or not they'd want to keep the traceability back for more of these use cases. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Joe, it's a good point that everybody be aware that the implementation guide for basic provenance was quite literally intentionally constrained to basic provenance needs, which was cross-organizational, who sent this to me and why. Things like this would require something more than basic, and the provenance resource within FHIR can clearly handle it. But yes, these are use cases that were explicitly not in scope of basic.
Right. So we're just about at time. So I appreciate this, Gary. This is some good stuff. I think what we would need to do is, if we were to take this up, it would be that this would kind of be the first step, like the high level principles, and then they would need to turn into, okay, for this use case, we need to capture provenance in this way, and so on. You know, because some of these things you get for free with certain mechanisms, right? So we would just need to do a gap analysis and identify where the pain points are, where the gaps are.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Thanks.
All right, thank you for that. And thank you, everybody. We're gonna just continue on down this road next week.
We'll do that the next 3 meetings. Yeah, just so a reminder, we will be meeting through December 17th. So the next 2 meetings, we'll be posting information from this recording and everything to the site. This is self-service. You go find it. It's generally available within 24 hours after the meeting. Sometimes before, sometimes right at time, but usually within 24 hours. We will pick up where we dropped off here next week. And Dr. Greg, anything else you want to add as closing?
Nope, nothing to add. Thank you. This was a great discussion. Really enjoyed it. Thanks everybody for participation.
All right. With that, everyone have a wonderful evening, rest of your week. Take care.